button. All right, welcome to Grace Bible Church School of Theology, and let's open with a word of prayer. Thank you, Father, that we can gather tonight and talk about some things that are happening around in the world around us and see how they line up with what you have prophesied and predicted and told us to look for. And so I just pray you would give us wisdom tonight and understanding of the things that we talk about. Help us to stay on track and not to wander, and keep us in the truth. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we live in an interesting time, and we're trying from the scriptures to determine if there's anything that we can see in the world around us that would be some sort of marker to determine in God's timeline of human history and his working with man where we are. That's an interesting thing. We know the next event that's revealed about us is the rapture. And so the rapture of the church is next, and there are no signs. There's nothing that we can look for that says, here comes the rapture. There's nothing we were waiting for that is going to, that we can determine that says we've got to wait for this to happen and then the rapture. There are no signs, and it is imminent, and it could happen today. Could be in heaven before you make it home tonight. You make it to your real home. We just don't know. And that's why we never lose hope, and we should always be ready. So, but as far as the second coming of Christ, there are multitudes of things that God says this will happen, and this would happen. And so before the return of Christ in power and glory to take place, there are things that need to happen. God says they will happen before. And so we can see what's happening in the world around us, and we can look in the Bible and say, is it possible that we're seeing the stage set up? And that's one of the things that Christians have probably done all the time. 2,000 years of that, looking. And so let me just remind you from Revelation chapter 13. And this is talking about the beast that rises up out of the sea, and he is given power from the dragon, and he has a partner who is called the false prophet. And it says that in verse 14, the false prophet deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. And he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on the right hand or in their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And so that's where we get that mystery about the name 666. Okay, the next verse, right? 18. And so here we are given a little glimpse of a kingdom and a leader with power that is able to rule the world. It says all the world wonders after the beast and worship him. And so one of the things we've always looked for, as far as us knowing that we're coming to the end, is the possibility of a worldwide system or government. And what we're seeing about today is we're going to talk a little bit about what's called the Great Reset. So some of you have probably been following or reading about this. I believe is it Glenn Beck has written a book on this, and it's, I think it's on Amazon if you want to get one. But this has been thought to be, this is some sort of conspiracy theory thing, or some talk, and yet the more we find out about it, the more we find out this is a very serious thing. There are people that actually embrace this and are working very hard for it, some very important people. So we're going to just talk a little bit about this, because I think that this is something that's happening around us today that is similar or preparatory for some of the things the Bible talks about. God says that he has established the nations, and he set the boundaries of the different nations. And yet, man, since the flood, we know he has worked, Satan has worked through man to remove those boundaries. And we'll see that the Great Reset is a lot about returning to Babel, if you would, and preparing for a narrow system of leadership that governs the world. Now, the fewer involved in a circle of power, the easier it is to corrupt that power, isn't it? So, anyway, how many of you have heard of the Great Reset? Somewhere on the news, everything. Okay, so I don't know who actually gave it that adjective, the Great Reset, but it is something that is promoted by this man, Klaus Schwab, who since 1971 has really been an economic philosopher, if you would, a guy with some what he thought was answers for Europe and now for the world, which is a form of socialism that he is seeking to promote on the world. But it's really very much a corporate socialism, or some describe it as being a form of fascism, where these elite leaders and corporations make decisions that are best for us. I know you feel better when unelected bureaucrats and people that you have no control over whether they're in leadership or not make decisions for you. And I hope you listen to some of the words, but is it possible that there have been more uses of the word democracy than in the last few years in our country? It's just every time you turn around, this is a threat to democracy, or this is not democrat, whatever. And if you know about our country and our government, you understand that if democratic is an adjective for republic, ours is a nation, a constitutional government, nation of laws, not of men. And so we do have a representative government. So there are clearly aspects of democracy incorporated into our form of government. But we were never designed to be a democracy. And democracy, as nice as it sounds, is basically mob rule. The majority gets to make the decisions. And so what we've been seeing, and the Great Reset will very much encourage this, is making the individual less important and making the whole more important. And our founding fathers, the scriptures are the basis for this, and we need to understand that if the individual is not protected with rights and freedom, then no one is. No one is. It's very important. And our form of government saw how important that was to protect the individual. and not to have this state thing that is somehow the important thing, the God thing. All right, so you probably heard of the Great Reset. You all said yes once or twice, and if you haven't really studied it or listened to some of the voices spouting this, you might think as well it's another one of those ideas that somebody has thrown out to try to push their philosophy. But this has really been worked on, developed, and come to some sort of fruition in the last couple of years. Well, there is nothing really secret about this. You can go to the World Economic Forum's website, and they're very proud of what they're doing, and they have, I wish we wouldn't do this, but there's some news programs and websites that use video so much. And I just like the old thing where they put the words there and you can read them, you know? And you got to look at a face and you got to listen to them talk and wait till they get to what you want to hear. But it's a bunch of videos, and it's got the movers and the shakers in the world. And they're talking about what a great opportunity this is. So this is basically a global plan pushing a massive change in the world economy. And so they call it the Great Reset. So we're talking about turning something that is got its weaknesses for sure, but a system that is currently in place, and turning it inside out and upside down. Now, what the Great Reset really develops is a form of feudalism, and in fact, one of the great lines that describe this by Schwab himself is, "You will own nothing and be happy." And so, you know, our founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence, we're endowed by our Creator with 3 inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Does anybody know what was almost instead of the pursuit of happiness? Property. Property. Property is very, very important. And in the pursuit of happiness, they thought that was broader, I guess. But property is, can you imagine? I mean, eternal things, spiritual things you can have without any property, but your being is, your independence, your freedom, your happiness is in many ways tied to the things that you're able to work for and possess. And so God recognizes property, and there can be no doubt. If there was no such thing as property, how could there be a commandment that says thou shalt not steal? There's no ownership. I can't steal. Under no ownership, how can you steal? You can't. It's what's yours is yours, and what's mine is yours, and that kind of thing. Or what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. However it goes, but the Bible teaches that, and there's the whole system that God's established on this earth that has to do with ownership. Now, as Christians, we see ownership in a little different way than maybe those of the world do, because ownership is really stewardship, isn't it? I mean, everything belongs to God, and He has entrusted us to things, and He has allowed us to gain things through our work and efforts, and those are blessings from God. And God says, that's yours for my glory, and people are not allowed to just come and take it for themselves. Okay? And so this is one of the reasons that we even have government. You understand? Government is meant to protect contract and property, and those kind of life and liberty are supposed to be protected by government. This is not supposed to be the Wild West where everybody has to have their guns and defend their families all the time, shooting one another. Government is meant to bring about a peaceful interaction with that, and somebody else who will defend your rights and punish the evildoer. But so feudalism, if you remember that from your history class, is where these elite, the king and then the others underneath the king would, at the behest of the king, if you would own properties. And everybody else worked for the people who owned the properties. And so their livelihood was to work the farm for the owner, or you would owe that owner a portion of your crops and things like that. And so everything funneled upward to these elite leaders, monarchs, and those under them. And so instead of having kings in this system, we really have billionaires and bureaucrats, basically, that are, whether they're in the United Nations, or they're in some other organization that is given global credibility and power by the people that we elect, acknowledge them with power that they shouldn't have. This is a system that they're thinking of bringing in, working to bringing in, where there's this huge transfer of monies and properties and stuff to these super wealthy people. And we've already seen this happening, haven't we? That the wealthy have gotten crazy wealthy through this. And what is happening? Well, it has to be a monopoly of sorts. That what happens is that instead of a bunch of mom and pop stores and businesses, some of them have already been pushed out of business. But in the last 2 years, about 60% that have failed for permanent. They're gone. They're not going back. And can you imagine some of these places trying to run a restaurant, and you're being closed all the time. You're getting rules that you can't operate in. Then you get people who don't want to show up to work or don't want to work for that money, and it's just changing everything. Well, there's an influence top down to bring this about, because there's a benefit to this. There's a poster back there in the window, with John D. Rockefeller, and we have others who are given credit for this too. But this is a man who has pushed for this global society and this global governments. The world needs it. It's the right thing to do. We know better than you do. And one of the things they've been looking for is a crisis to bring this about. And so we have this crisis with COVID-19. And it's whatever, whether it's what they say it is or not, it is a real virus. We know that. People get sick from it. But the steps and the decisions that have been made under this pandemic are different than we've ever had before, and the effects have been, in some cases, catastrophic. And but we keep plugging along. That's the way we are. It'll get better. We'll get back to normal somehow. But so they have taken advantage of this. Now, if you I'm going to use some information that is available to you if you want to read it more. And some of you might have read this. I know we got some Hillsdale supporters here tonight. But they put out a publication called Imprimis. Does anybody ever read Imprimis? Okay, yeah. The Supporters of Hillsdale, that's right. And what a great thing to read another view, and people with conservative viewpoints, pro-constitutional government. A school in, believe it or not, in Michigan, and this school takes no federal funds. And so they have no strings attached that they have to teach critical race theory or socialism or gender studies. They don't have to teach any of that stuff because they do not receive government money, which really allows them quite a bit of freedom. And so anyway, there was an article from, I believe it was October, maybe November of last year, on the Great Reset. So there's some credibility there if you have, if you know anything about Hillsdale College. They're not a bunch of crazies. It is free. They do not charge from it. If you go to Hillsdale College website, you can sign up for Imprimis. And what does it come, monthly? Yeah. And it really has thought-provoking articles. I mean, they're usually taken from a chapel or a speech at the college, and they're put into written form and then dispersed. But let's see. I was going to quote from them before I introduced them so long that who knows where I am now. So the idea of this reset is to use the crisis that we have in order to bring about the economic reforms that have been being put forth by the World Economic Forum for decades. And Mr. Schwab's idea is again, it's a capitalism and free market are the reason that the world's in a bad shape, and it'll never come about properly. We'll never get to the utopia that Karl Marx described for us so aptly in his writings. But he calls his form is called Stakeholder Capitalism, and the interesting thing about this is that we see some of this being pushed in the world today before the COVID crisis, and that was in the nation of communist China. And the regime before the current one started this, socialism will not pay for itself. So we can allow certain businesses that will respect the Communist Party's authority to use capitalistic methods to gain money. And then we'll use that money to fund our socialist government. And yeah, yes.
You use the term, or a word that I want you to explain. You use stakeholder. Now, how is that different from shareholder?
Because it's got a broader definition. These people can define anyone as a stakeholder, because if you're Coca-Cola, now this is one of the major corporations in the whole world. Okay, they don't just make soft drinks. I mean, this is a big corporation. And so they're shareholders. These are people who own stock. And so as the stock goes up, they make profits. As it goes down, they lose. And so that's a limited number of people. But in the definition here, a stakeholder is really whoever they want it to be, because who is affected by Coca-Cola? Who is affected by how they run their business? Who is affected by how they spend their money and how they use their influence? Well, you could make all of us stakeholders in a sense. This is a broader term that they'll use. Stakeholders probably won't refer to everybody, but it could. So they can define that stakeholder capitalism to say, you need to run your business for the sake of the poor people in Bangladesh. You need to consider them in your decision making. You need to consider the world. There's stakeholders. You need to up your investment in environmental protections and things like that. You need to be involved in using clean energy. You need, these stakeholders, as I read, it appears he is thinking that your business is going to benefit the world and bring about, there's terms that we see in this that we've heard, the news media has been using these terms to put them in our head. How many have ever heard the term sustainability? Have you heard that before? Like over and over. Is something, it's good if it's sustainable, okay? Do you know that fossil fuels are not sustainable? That they are, I don't know if we could ever live long enough to use it up. Probably not. But the fact is it's on a planet and there's a limited amount of petroleum in the earth and fossil fuels. So that's not sustainable. At some point, maybe a few thousand years from now, we'll run out and then it's gone. There are other things. Sustainability means using things that can be replaced, not stuff that can't be replaced. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that capitalism requires a company to produce the best results they can for their stockholders, not their stakeholders. And what Coca-Cola has done is they say, oh, we have to think about Black Lives Matter, so we'll give them several $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doesn't that take away from the results of what the stockholders would receive?
Yes. But see, somehow, I didn't see the details of this, but somehow that system has to go away with the shareholders.
Oh, yeah.
It has to go away because if you're going to own nothing and be happy, well, you can't be one of these. There is this huge movement in this philosophy to narrowly bless, if you would, the elite with tremendous wealth and power, and then socialism for everybody else. And I've heard Elon Musk talking about, and I don't know what he thinks about the Great Reset. He thinks about a lot of things, but he's thinking about AI, and that's really related in here. We're going to talk about this, and he's talking about robotics and getting to a point where machinery will do all the work. What are these people going to do? Yeah. And so he says, well, we'll have to have a universal income for people. So the corporations or whoever are doing this, they're going to have machinery that's going to do all the work. And then these people will get, whatever the elites deem is all right for you to, your allowance. You're going to get an allowance. Okay. Now, there's a lot of things that have to be changed, and we've already seen it happen, and we hear them talking about it. The other term that that you'll hear and is related in this is the one equity. Okay? And so equity means fairness from their view. And so, the commercials about it, everywhere you see it, that it's not fair if somebody has more than somebody else. Well, that's a dumb view of fairness, isn't it? There are reasons why some people have more than others or people have less than others, and it's not always a matter of fairness. Sometimes it's a matter of work or choices that people make, priorities. That has something to do with it. And so equity would take away any consequences. Now, we have people in our country and other countries that they don't have to, they have a minimum income that comes in. And, I was reading some about the United Kingdom, and there are people that are healthy, young people, that get paid from the government for doing nothing. And how healthy is that? That can't be any healthy at all. So what would some people do? That maybe hang out at the pub or whatever. You have to have a sense of worth that comes from responsibility and purpose, don't you? And to take that away from people is, to me, is an evil. And the idea even, well, this is a solution. We're going to go to robotics and we're going to go to AI and all this stuff, and there won't be enough work for people. I don't think that'll ever happen in God's earth here, but they're planning for it. What will we do? We'll talk about universal income. Well, some of you are making way too much, and some over there are not making enough. So equity will bring all this to a level playing field. And and so in the Great Reset, this guy who is believing he's going to be in a lofty tower, but you're not going to have to worry about anything. We're going to provide for your food, your health care, your shelter, everybody, but you won't own it. You'll just live in it. We'll tell you where you can live and how many kids you can have and all this stuff. It's bureaucrats making decisions, and you'll be happy. I can't believe that anyway. And we have probably the most miserable people will be the people who know better. You got to do something about them. People that already live off of $2 a month, they're going to think this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, won't they? Okay. But anyway, this is moving toward that economic capitalism, stakeholder rather than shareholder. Stakeholder capitalism entails corporate cooperation with the state and a vastly increased government intervention in the economy. And that really gives me a lot of confidence, because I see our representatives are able to make such wonderful, wise decisions about finances and spending your tax dollars and giving them away. And I go, oh my goodness.
Aren't they already doing that?
Yeah.
Spending the tax dollars they don't have.
But you see, the system that's in place where we have nations and governments and individual responsibility, it all works against this system, and it all has to be undone. And the Great Reset sees this as an opportunity to do it. And again, the Chinese system is, we've talked a little bit about it one time. We talked about their social credit system. And this is something that is seen here as a good idea. And when we think about the kingdom of Antichrist, we can see how something like that would be a part of it, where they have learned, like in China, that they don't have to go door to door beating people up to make them behave. They can put cameras on every corner, and they can say, listen, if you get your social credits and you behave yourself, we're going to allow you to travel once a month, or you'll be on the list to get this good job. But if you don't have a credit score, and I'm not talking about your financial credit score, which is a preparation in my mind for this, you will get your social credit score will allow you to be happier. And so you just submit and you comply and you be a good little citizen, and you won't own anything, but you'll be happy. Okay, and this is ridiculous to us, isn't it? And yet this is being talked about in the highest circles. Like this is wonderful. This is the answer. And so, well, what's the problem? Well, we have to have terrible problems. One, the world is not prepared for a pandemic. And so we've learned that we have to do all these things because there's another one coming. You know there's going to be more pandemics coming. And so we've learned some things and we know how to deal with them, and we've got some corrective measures. No, they don't. They didn't learn anything. They've already knew what they were going to do, and they've already decided to do these things. And some of their philosophies, I guess, their ideas have been verified by the actions that they took. But they've learned some things. There's some bad people that won't comply. But they're working hard, Satan behind it. And I mentioned it to some of you, but I watched just a brief clip of a program in Canada. And so I used to think, what's the difference between Canada and the United States? Like hardly any difference. They drive the same kind of cars we do, and they come down here in the winter and thaw out. And they do, nice people. And but this video was of like a talk show, and you got a host interviewing, I think, parents and teachers and young children. And they're talking about society and the pandemic and all of that, and the answers these children gave, like what about people who don't get the vaccine? Well, I'd call the police on them. They should be arrested. These are little kids who this is how they feel, and then the audience would clap when those kids said stuff like that. And I'm going, how much of this is going on? You say, well, it's happened before. If you read Dr. Haller's book about his growing up in Germany, Hitler's Germany, you see, well, that was a real, that was important to them to indoctrinate the children. The children would actually become those who turned in their parents or their neighbors if they saw anything. You see something, say something, right? And I wonder where I heard that before. And so, what you can't have just a void. I know that's what the anarchists seem to want, but these people do not want anarchy. They do not want a crisis. See, the Chinese have shown them how to move peacefully into this society. Now, there may be some people, the Chinese have gotten rid of, I don't know, just a few million people, I guess, that wouldn't comply. But so that could happen. But they're not talking about this because they see, and they've learned from this pandemic, there are a lot of people who will comply and roll over and allow them to take over and to move toward this global society. Fairness, man, everybody wants to be fair, but it requires lowering the economic status of people in wealthier nations to that of people in poor nations. So it's talking about funneling money, to places that don't have it. And this new global government will be like Robin Hood. It'll steal from the rich and it'll give to the poor. Not really.
No, not really.
Not really. The rich will not be stolen from if they're part of the system. They will be the benefactors of this. The actions, let me summarize some of these things that make this up. So it is a form of communism, socialism, because it abolishes ownership of lands and goods. Private land ownership will be abolished, and populations will be moved to smart cities. Did you remember in campaigns talking about like suburbs are evil? You remember that? Suburbs are evil. They're not environmentally friendly. You got all these people needing cars to travel, and you take up too much land, and the Chinese have moved people into cities. It's like a terrible thing to live out in the country. You're a bad person, and you're less than a good China person, and so to live in a city where they can monitor you and you can take the subway or the metro or whatever, and it's more environmentally friendly, but they have more control. Now, I don't know about you, but even in our country, I have no desire to live in a large city. If we look at our country, what's the worst place to be is in a large city. Yeah, but they've already been talking about it. And where does this come from? It comes from outside. In this global group that's working toward this, it comes from out there. And so if we can move everybody out, this goes back a while back, some of the ideas that we thought with the United Nations, but they're in cahoots with the World Economic Forum, and they work together on this. We've talked about the 2030 agenda that they have, and some of it sounds wonderful, some of it sounds like pie in the sky or something, but it's we got to save the planet. The planet is gonna run out of resources. There's too many people, and we've got to fix this. And that's what they're using as excuse, is they're going to fix all this. And so you've got to look and you got to listen and see this happening. And we've the only way that we can actually resist is to know what they're doing and point it out and speak up, and say, well, look what's wrong with this thing, okay? Private ownership. But some of the wealthiest people, like Bill Gates in our country, have bought up farmland like crazy. Why do these people want to buy up farmland? They don't want to be farmers. Yeah, you've got to be dependent upon them and on this system. And so monopolizing, the small farmers have been being pushed out for some time, the small business.
The slaves on the farm to work to...
Yeah. And then there are large belts of land that's being converted or talked about being converted to nature. Get people out of there. If you've been reading this is something the United Nations, we've actually turned over some of our, the sovereignty of our national parks and stuff to outside nations and United Nations. And that is just wrong. But the idea is, well, we'll put everybody in the cities, and then who's going to be able to enjoy the world? The excuse is it was the bears and the birds, but probably be the elite that'll have the ability to go in and enjoy that. Capitalism, of course, will be replaced. And that companies, because of stakeholders, they are now to pursue the well-being of all people on the entire planet, not their stockholders, but the stakeholders. And prioritize climate change. This is not going away. It didn't go away, even though the pandemic has allowed the globalists to move forward in ways they were not getting very far with climate change. But climate change is still there, and they talk about it all the time, I mean, there's people, who was I listening to that talked about, we've only got 9 years now. Oh, it was DiCaprio. The guy who fly to Europe in a private jet to speak at an environmental thing. Don't do as we do as we say. Mr. Al Gore, wasn't he? He was a perfect example.
For 30 years.
Yeah. And his home had the carbon footprint of a small city, but he's going to save the world. And isn't that maddening? It's not about them, it's about us. Just roll over and submit. And so, but accelerating efforts to meet net zero emissions, building green infrastructure, creating. So maybe your shareholder is not going to get so much because we had to invest in converting to clean energy with our factories or whatever. So you shareholders, you're taking a big hit. But we have to remember the stakeholders here. And and then all of this stuff, the world banks and stuff. Now, companies and whatever that depend on financing from some of these places, there are business social credits, so to speak, in this system. Well, how green are you depends on whether we'll loan you money or we'll extend you credit or give you a good rate on the money you need. You see the influence of the climate change in this great reset. And so you need to toe the line or you will be penalized for it. And so it is a system of power, using it to make people submit, and to make even corporations and businesses submit. Who's been so successful is the Chinese about this, and I've been flabbergasted trying to figure out why is Elon Musk going to go build cars in China? Almost everybody who has gone over there and invested, it's turned out bad, hadn't they? They've lost some real money, or they've lost control. The Chinese have no qualms about making your patent and then making all they want and selling them on the side. They have no system of morality like we think. That's not honest. They don't. This is it's just good business. And so global digitalization is a part of this. And when we see with the Antichrist there, no one can buy or sell without the mark and without being a part of the system. And by putting people in cities and using phones and other technology that we are becoming more and more dependent upon, data mining it's like we just say, anything you want to know about me, you can know it. Mm-hmm. Anything at all that you want to, and you can, I know you'll probably use it in a negative way in my life, but I'm going to let you have it anyway. How many of you have ever read those legal agreements you have to sign in order to use your phone or a computer program or something like that? It's like, scroll down, it's like, oh my goodness, do I want to just say no? And I've lost, I don't know how many pictures. They didn't ask me, or I didn't realize they had asked me. They took them off my phone and they moved them to the cloud. And now they say, you've got to sign this agreement to access the cloud. And they got my information. And they said, well, I've got to sign this or I don't get my pictures and my information back. That's like a digital blackmail, isn't it? Yeah. But we bought in the system, and to get along, maybe I'll just finally sign the agreement. I don't know. That's what we're doing. And so, but these people, it reminds us of the kingdom of the Antichrist is a kingdom of, in Daniel, it's iron mixed with clay, isn't it? So Musk and some of these folks are talking about artificial intelligence, but they're also talking about making us like androids or bionics, tying us in. I hear Musk sometimes talking about, that the technology is able to do so much data per blah, blah, blah. It's just the rate in which it can make decisions and find information is slowed down so much by interacting with us. By the time we enter our information or something, it could have been done 100 million times, And so what we need to do is make a better connection between you and your device. And that might be one of those little matrix connections in the back of your skull or something. But they're thinking and they're talking about this. How can we connect our minds more directly to these machines? And then you're saying, well, then how do we maintain control? If they already have access to everything we're doing almost with our computers and our phones, it's so hard to, we have to go to all kinds of links to keep it private. What happens when we are directly, is it possible, as they have talked about, that you could be prosecuted for what you're thinking? We already see people being prosecuted for what they wrote or what they said, you know. And we have it by your data connection that you are thinking about this, and that is strictly forbidden, and we're gonna lock you up. We talk about dystopian worlds. How could anybody ever go there? Because there is deception, and there is a promise of a better world. A better world. We're talking about fixing the problems that we see, the inequities in the world and the suffering of the world, and the idea that, if we don't do something radical right now, this world won't even exist in 9 or 10 years. So we've got to do something. And so, but also in this Great Reset, we are seeing some, from every government just about, we're seeing people participate in this. But they're not doing it as representatives of the countries. They're doing it is because they're part of this elite group. And so they're not accountable in that what they're doing to voters or the people who they're supposed to work for or represent. And we have that in our system too. We have people in Washington and probably Tallahassee and wherever that are serving their own interest or the interest of these people, and it's not right. But the goal of the reset is to do away with these borders. You've got people involved in this, not like just Schwab, but George Soros is involved in this. It's hard to say that name without wanting to spit, but it's this man has been involved in some very evil things, surviving, and he's rich. He's put economies and governments in big trouble by his investments and decisions to finance. He's a smart guy, but we know that in some of our cities, his foundations and money has gone to elect district attorneys that don't want to prosecute criminals. I mean, what's that about? Don't you want law and order? No, we want you guys to give up on this system and come into ours. Bill Gates involved in this, and there's some dark things in this man's closets, and some of these thinkers are thinking about they're the answer. They're messianic in their thoughts. I have the money, so I must be special, and I can save the world. Y'all just listen to me. And this is not brand new. Have you ever studied Mr. Ford? Who was the first Ford? Henry Ford. Have you ever studied anything about the man's life? I mean, he was a hard-working, practical man, and he got to be one of the richest men in the whole country. And then he started having time to think, and he figured out that he had answers for society's ills. And he built a little town, and he wanted to put these rules on his employees and incentives for them to live a certain way. And he said, well, maybe his intentions were wonderful, but I mean, you can't live another person's life. You can't put yourself in a place where I'll make all the decisions, because even though there are people who do not know how to make decisions for their life, but who puts somebody like that? But that's where he was, and we've got people like that. Like, I think Bill Gates is in that place today where he's so smart and he's so gifted that he knows how to fix these things. And but wisdom is justified of her children, and it's God who tells us how things should be. And and he tells us really why things aren't right. And the whole, the answers that the Great Reset wants to have and the problems it wants to fix, in reality, these corporations and these governments and these people have made decisions that have brought around much of these problems. And so that's not very good to bring about problems and then say, well, look, I've got the solution, I'll fix it. Well, you're the cause of it. It sounds like diabolic, doesn't it? So is the Great Reset the kingdom of the Antichrist? I'm not saying that at all. But as we see, if they're become more and more successful with this, if people don't say, hey, forget that, we're not sending anybody to Washington or Tallahassee that's been promoting this stuff. I mean, we want people who are going to pull back from it and remember this is a sovereign nation, and we're not going to secede our economy, our wealth, our sovereignty to some global elitist group. It's clearly not wise. It's not right, and so let me just close with this. This was interesting about this, if I can find it. Okay, so stuff just happens, right? In 2018 and 2019, the World Economic Forum organized 2 events, and these became the primary inspiration for the Great Reset Project. In May 2018, they collaborated, the World Economic Forum, and I'm quoting here from this article by Hillsdale's, the World Economic Forum collaborated with Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security to conduct Claude X, that's the name of it. It's a simulation of a natural pandemic response. This is in May of 2018. And the exercise simulated the outbreak of a novel strain of a human para-influenza virus. Okay, here we go. With genetic elements. Oh, wow. They called it Claude X. I don't know who Claude was, but anyway, Clad X maybe. And so the simulation ended with a news report stating that in the face of this virus, without effective vaccines, experts tell us that we could eventually see 30 to 40 million deaths in the United States and more than 900 million around the world, 12% of the global population. So that simulation, these guys got together, World Economic Forum is working together and financing this, and they say, wow, we really got to prepare for a global pandemic, 2018. October 2019, they collaborated again with Johns Hopkins and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on another exercise about pandemics, Event 201. And it simulated an international response. And so this was 2 months before COVID outbreak in China, and 5 months before the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic. So they're running this simulation. Now the simulations anticipated almost every eventuality of the actual COVID crisis. Almost everything that has happened was anticipated or reported in this simulation. And it's like it caught us by surprise. We were just shocked. We didn't know what to do. Well, their responses and their effects included worldwide lockdowns, collapse of businesses and industries, the adoption of biometric surveillance technologies, an emphasis on social media censorship to combat misinformation, and the flooding of society and legal media with authoritative sources, widespread riots, and mass employment. So months before the actual COVID crisis, they have already performed a simulation and written a report of what it's going to be like. And isn't it something? They were so accurate. It was just like that. I'm sure it was just a coincidence. Yeah. And so this organization, the World Economic Forum, they have no governmental delegated power. Nobody has given them authority, and yet they have such influence, they might as well be elected government. And they might as well be the UN. It's amazing. And so the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. And so,
Talk to the people with money and convince them this is the
yep. And it's not just influence with, don't you think this is a good thing? They with the money they have and the power that the people who are embracing this, they can really hold companies, corporations, and governments hostage unless they comply. So anyway, what's that got to do with prophecy? I hope you see that it anticipates some things that God talked about before. Remember, in the beginning of sorrows, Jesus talked about basically pandemics, didn't he? And so they're not through with us on this. I'm sorry. I wish this was over and we're all going to get well, but there'll be another round of it. I feel certain that there will be. All right. Well,
be round after round until they get us under control.
but this world is not your home, Betty. You're just
No, I'm not
passing
worried
through.
about
Okay. All right. Any comments or corrections?
Yeah, it sounds like that what you were just talking about with this exercise that they went through and what they said that would happen if they did have a pandemic, sounds like it was a script that was played out.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It was scripted that people knew, if you're going to be governor of Michigan or California, this is the script you're to follow.
That's right.
New York, this is how you should do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Wasn't the EU kind of a start of all that?
It was most of these people come out of it. In fact, his first sphere of operation was Europe, and so we see that.
Really, the Brits decided it wasn't right for them.
Yeah, but the globalists have had a big foothold in Europe for some time now. So, well, shall we close in prayer? Well, thank you, Father, that you're on the throne and that Jesus is coming again. Lord, while we're here, help us to be faithful to you and to the truth. Lord, by your mercy, please keep us free till you call us home, and we'll thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.